On May the 7th, just a couple of weeks from now, England goes to the polls. But this isn't just another set of elections. This is shaping up to be a political earthquake. The two parties that have dominated British politics for decades are both expected to take a hammering, while new forces rise into their place. Labour could lose thousands of seats, and the Conservatives aren't far behind either. With parties like Reform and the Greens surging into the gap, this is going to be a completely different political landscape. So ask yourself as this: is this just politics as usual? Or is this what happens when a country stops feeling like one nation and starts breaking into competing tribes? Because to me, this feels like something very different in this moment. It's not just frustration, because Britain has seen that before. It's not just anger either. That comes and goes. This feels deeper, because it feels like people are no longer arguing about how to run the country. They're arguing over what the country even is anymore. And when that question starts being asked, you're no longer dealing with normal politics, you're dealing with identity. Look around you and you can feel it. Communities that once lived side by side now feel like they're living parallel lives. People don't just disagree anymore, they distrust. Politics has become something tribal, where you're not simply voting for policies, you're voting for one side or the other. And once that line's drawn, everything changes. Debate becomes conflict, disagreement becomes hostility, and compromise starts to look like betrayal. But this didn't happen overnight. It has been building for years. Part of it comes clearly from the pace of change we've seen in this country. Over the last few decades, Britain has changed faster than at any point in modern history. For some, this has brought opportunity and growth. But for others, it feels like something very familiar has been lost. And when change happens quickly, without a strong sense of shared identity to hold it together, people aren't just going to naturally unite, they will retreat into what feels safe and known. And at the same time, trust in institutions has completely eroded. The government, media, education, more and more people feel that the structures that are supposed to represent them no longer reflect their values or even listen to their concerns. When people feel ignored for long enough, they don't become quieter, they become louder, more frustrated and more entrenched in their views. And alongside that, we've seen a shift away from this shared national story that has lasted us for thousands of years and more towards competing identities. Increasingly, people are encouraged to see themselves primarily through the lens of background, belief, or ideology, rather than part of a collective whole. And once you start dividing people up in that way, unity becomes so much harder to maintain. You don't get cohesion. You just get more and more fragmentation. And into that space, something else begins to rise. And there's an important distinction that often gets blurred, deliberately or not, between patriotism and nationalism. You see, patriotism to me is something very different to what it's portrayed as. It isn't about exclusion and it isn't about superiority. At its core, patriotism is inclusive. It says, this is our country, these are our shared values, and anyone who believes in them and contributes to them belongs here. It's something that can unite people from completely different backgrounds because it's built on a common identity rather than a very narrow one. And I feel that personally. My own family history is tied to this country through immigration. My grandfather came over from Ireland after the war, like so many others, and built a life here. He didn't come to change what Britain was. He came to become part of it. He worked, he contributed, and he passed down a sense of belonging to this country, to his family. That, to me, is what patriotism looks like. It's not about where you started, it's about what you stand for and what you become part of. But then on the other hand, nationalism, especially in its more extreme forms, is something else entirely. Whether it's based on ethnicity or religion, it tends to draw lines rather than erase them. It says, this is for us, not them. We are superior, not them. And once that mindset takes hold, division becomes inevitable. You don't build a shared nation that way with nationalism. You build instead competing groups within it. And here's the problem. You see, when patriotism is completely and consistently dismissed, mocked, or treated as something negative, it doesn't just disappear. People don't just suddenly stop needing identity, belonging, or connection. Instead, something else fills that space, and what fills it isn't always healthy or unifying. So the real challenge that faces us in Britain is not about identity at all, or any more extreme version of it. The challenge is whether we can rebuild a sense of patriotism that brings together everybody in this country without tipping into the kind of nationalism that actually pushes us apart. And this is where the elections come back into focus. Because what we're seeing now isn't just a shift in votes, it's a breakdown in trust. Labour and the Conservatives aren't simply losing support, they're losing the confidence of the people who feel that neither side truly represents them. And when that happens, the political landscape doesn't just change gradually, it fractures. Some people will move towards alternative parties. Some will disengage completely, not even bother voting. And others are pulled towards more hardline positions because they feel that that's the only place where they're going to be heard. And this is how political earthquakes begin. Not with one dramatic moment, but with millions of small fractures forming beneath the surface until eventually something gives. It's a bit like the death by 1,000 cuts. So this election campaign and what's going to happen in May, it's not about councils or local services, it's about something much deeper. It's about whether Britain still sees itself as one nation with a shared identity, or whether it's becoming a collection of competing groups, each with its own agenda and its own idea of what the country should be. Because once that shared identity is gone, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. And that brings us back to the question. On May the 7th, when people step into those polling booths, what are they really voting for? Is it a party? A policy? Or is it a version of Britain that they still believe in? Because if we continue down a path where everything is tribal, where everything is divided, where people no longer feel connected to one another, then it won't matter who wins the elections. We risk losing something far more important. The idea that we are one people living under a shared set of values, moving in the same direction. So to end, the real question is this. What kind of country do we want to rebuild? And who are we willing to stand beside to do it?